I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's talk about the China-Russia meeting. Give us some insight as to what's going on. This is more than meeting at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. This is actually an official state visit by Xi Jinping to Russia.
Yes.
Give us some background as to why this is taking place and what this means.
Indeed. I mean, this is a state visit by the Chinese president to Moscow. Xi Jinping made the point that it's his first state visit in his second term as Chinese president. And obviously, he and Putin meet very often. They meet regularly. Putin was in Beijing just a little while ago to attend the Belt and Road conference there. But this is a big event, 3 days. Xi Jinping brought a huge delegation with him. There's been intense meetings between the Chinese and the Russians. There was a extended 2 days of meetings in Moscow, with first negotiations, which are called, as the Russians say, in a restricted format. That's to say, basically, Putin and Xi Jinping with their close advisors. And then there was a second meeting of Xi Jinping and Putin, which is an extended meeting with lots of people in the governments of the two countries involved. And you can actually find pictures of these two meetings, so you see the difference. I mean, they moved out of one room in the Kremlin into a much bigger one. It's quite impressive stuff, actually. But the actual overriding point about this is that the Chinese and the Russians are now increasingly and obviously speaking about each other as more than just partners. It's quite clear now that they're becoming geostrategic allies. I mean, the mask that they were just friends is, I think, starting to fall away. But the actual key to these meetings, is that they're now expanding massively their economic relations. Now, the key to these relations are energy. Russia is now becoming China's major source of raw materials and of oil and gas, with the Chinese increasingly investing in the Russian oil and gas complex. And that is very closely connected with Chinese concerns about possible blockades that might be that the United States is floating, as to, the United States trying to stop the flow of energy into China through the Straits of Malacca. And the Chinese have been talking about their concerns about that. Well, now they have the Russians at their back, and they're building all these great pipelines, the power of Siberia and all the rest. And that's been providing China with that degree of energy security that it had lacked up to now. But it's now clearly evolving beyond that, with the Chinese talking about relocating some factories, Chinese factories, to Russia to get round the tariff restrictions that the US is imposing, and to avail themselves of the opportunity to use Russia as a transit state for Chinese manufactured goods heading to Europe and even perhaps to the US. But perhaps even more importantly, the Chinese and the Russians now talking about integrating the Chinese Belt and Road program with the Russian Eurasian Economic Community. So what we're looking at is growing convergence of two economies and the emergence of a single big Eurasian economic bloc.
Do you think that Trump's tariffs and the trade war with China accelerated this integration?
Yes, they have.
I mean, I think this was inevitable in one sense or another, but do you think it just sped it all up?
I get to discuss here the experience that I had when I went to China back in 2017. That's 2 years ago, because I visited Shanghai and I saw the way things were there. And the thing that really struck me was that everybody in China was very enthusiastic about increasingly close relations with Russia, political people, military people, but also surprisingly and very interestingly, ordinary people that you found on the streets. I was hosted part of the time I was there by a Russian banker, and he took me. We would go on walks, and when people discovered that he was Russian, it was quite extraordinary to see how they were reacting, to the fact that there was this Russian, and Russia was perceived at street level as China's great friend. But there was this gap. And the gap was with the business community. The business community in Shanghai and elsewhere in China was still very, very heavily oriented towards trade with the US. And you heard Russian business people complaining about the great difficulty they were having getting the Chinese to take them seriously, because the Chinese were saying, well, we've already got this extremely good relationship with the US. Why waste our time with Russia, which is a much smaller economy, which we don't know so well? Now, what has happened is that all those same Chinese businessmen who in 2017 were saying all those things are suddenly looking at 25% tariffs when they try to trade with the US. And this has come as a huge shock. Now, Chinese-Russian trade was already expanding at a very rapid rate, but at this level of the big enterprises, the big state-owned enterprises in China, which are very, very reflective of Chinese government policy. What is now happening, and we can see this now in Xi Jinping's visit and during Xi Jinping's visit to SPIEF, is that the sort of middle and smaller level businesses in China, which were previously very focused on the US, are now suddenly thinking about the Russian alternative, not just because they want to sell goods to Russia, which of course they do, but because, as I said, they want to use Russia as a potential transit state.
And what's Russia's angle in this? Is this purely, outside of the financial and the economics, is there a geopolitical angle to this?
Absolutely. Just as the Chinese look to Russia to sort of secure their back, to secure their natural resources, to secure their pathway, if you wish, to Europe especially. The Russians looked for the Chinese for investment. They're looking to the Chinese to help them with certain aspects of their AI technologies where they still haven't yet fully caught up. The Russians are expanding heavily into AI, but they could use Chinese chips, for example, in place of the US ones. That's one possible way forward, and Chinese systems. But above all, for the Russians, I think it's a geopolitical thing, because Russia has felt very exposed over the last 5 years, over the sanctions, over the pressure on Ukraine that the Western powers have brought, over the pressure that's been put on the Russians over Syria. They felt to a great extent that they're taking on the US and the West all by themselves. And now they feel that they have the Chinese at their back, and that they no longer feel that they have to take on this great Western alliance without any real allies of their own. So the Russians have that reassurance, and the Chinese have theirs. It's a relationship that is going to burgeon. I think we're still very much actually at the early days of it. If you look at Russian-Chinese trade, it's the turnover is about $100 billion a year. It'll probably double within a very short time, and I suspect that's still only the start of it. And as I said, I think we're moving rapidly towards an emergence of a Eurasian economic bloc of the Chinese and the Russians, bringing together not just their two huge economies and militaries, but the other economies of Central at Central Asia and probably increasingly Eastern Europe too. And of course, we will see the Western alliance remaining as the in being, and we will, before very long, finally be looking at a bipolar world.
Xi Jinping told Russian state news, the TASS agency, he said, "Putin is my best and bosom friend." And that's a quote. Putin is my best and bosom friend. That's some statement, isn't it, Alexander?
It's an extraordinary statement. I mean, the two men have obviously developed an extraordinarily close and friendly relationship. I mean, they get on extremely well with each other. Of that, there's no question. But as I said, it's not just Putin and Xi. It's now starting to spread increasingly down the bureaucracies. And the militaries, the Chinese and Russian militaries, are now working very closely together on a huge range of things. But also we're now seeing industrial partnerships increasingly expanding. We've seen Alibaba, for example, developing a joint venture with the Russian Postal Service, which is, by the way, a significant company, doesn't just provide postal services, but the Chinese are obviously going to be involved in developing Russia's e-commerce networks. We're also seeing developing close relations at many, many levels. I repeat what I said. When I was in China, it really astonished me, actually, how enthusiastic people at street level were. And I think that that's becoming the general view in China now, that they're gradually coming round to seeing Russia as their great friend. And I think, interestingly enough, there are still some Russians who have some doubts about this, but their numbers are declining fast.
So you said that this is moving towards the bipolar world.
Yes.
People have been talking about this for a while now, but it looks like we're finally seeing it crystallize.
Absolutely.
What does that mean in essence, Alexander? I mean, does it mean it's China with Russia against the United States, and then you're going to have what? You're going to have Asian economies, Asian countries siding with China, siding with the U.S. You're going to have European countries having to pick sides, because when you mention Eurasia means Asia all the way up to Europe. So who's going where? Is this going to be a winner take all? Is this going to be like a George Bush kind of you're either with us or you're against us type of mantra? What's this in your mind? If you had to look ahead, what does this look like?
Well, let's look at the core territories. I think China and Russia, the Central Asian states, eventually, I suspect Turkey and Iran will be drawn into this bloc. The big question is whether the Eastern and Central European states will be. Already, there are the first very tentative little glimmers in Germany, that Germany has very good relations with China. Does it really feel more comfortable dealing with the US, which has been its long-standing ally, than with the Chinese and the Russians, who are, many Germans would consider them the future. But we can't be sure about Germany, because obviously it's got these very deep and very well-established links to the West, and there would be many people in Germany who would resist moving away from that. But anyway, even without Germany, you can see a very coherent economic, geopolitical bloc starting to emerge. I forgot to mention, but again, also, I think the two Koreas might also eventually be drawn in, and possibly at some point other states. I mean, if we look at East Asia, so many of the East Asian economies now, including economies of countries which you might consider to be antagonistic to China, like Vietnam, are also very, very heavily pulled into the Greater China economic orbit. I mean, I noticed that when I was traveling in East Asia in 2017, what a huge footprint the Chinese already have there. As for the US, well, there are the core territories, the English-speaking ones: Britain, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, obviously, and I suspect some of the other Atlantic states, which will continue to form. The core of what it should be stressed will be a very mighty alliance, and Japan also.
What do you mean by the other states? And are you talking about, say, like Italy's and
possibly Italy, possibly France too? We shall see. But I suspect that the old North Atlantic community, before it was so extraordinarily expanded in the 2000s, which I suspect, by the way, will over time come to be seen as an overstretch and an anomaly. As I said, I can see a US gradually retreating towards the core territories of the old NATO, the old North Atlantic Treaty Alliance, plus Japan, plus Australia, New Zealand, still a mighty concentration of geopolitical and economic power.
Do you mean like they're almost ceding territory? They're ceding the initiative to this China One Belt, One Road kind of thing, not, or they're just kind of drawing back into themselves?
They're not ceding it yet, but I think they will before very long. I mean, you can already see it with this rise of tariff barriers. The big question is, will the US start to extend this tariff war that is waging against its European allies? Because the key country to look at is Germany. But I can imagine other countries within the what is now the EU and NATO, like Bulgaria, like some of the Balkan states, like possibly Hungary, gradually being drawn towards the East Eurasian bloc also, and perhaps leaving the Atlanticist structures of NATO and the EU, which perhaps they were accidentally drawn into in the 1990s and early 2000s, when the US was at its peak.
Okay, let's touch base a little bit on the St. Petersburg Forum, where I believe that Xi Jinping was, I would say, a guest of honor.
Yeah,
a surprise.
Yeah,
guest of
absolutely.
Honor. Can you give us some background as to the forum and how this came about to actually have Xi Jinping there?
I mean, the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, which I've attended twice, by the way, is essentially Russia's showcase to the business communities of the world. It's the opportunity that the Russians offer for business people from around the world to come along to Russia's second capital, St. Petersburg, once a year, network with each other, meet Russian political leaders and Russian business leaders, establish contacts there, and see whether or not it's in their interests to start cutting deals with Russian business people and investing in the Russian economy and doing all the various things that business people of various countries do. It's a kind of combination of trade fair and massive networking exercise. And traditionally, the sort of countries that have tended to go to this fair, the business people that have been visiting it, have tended to come from Europe, from Western Europe. I mean, the Germans, when I was there, were heavily involved. Lots of Italian business people. Also, Emmanuel Macron has attended it. The former Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi has attended it. Merkel has previously gone. But now we see the country that is becoming Russia's biggest trade partner, China, is now moving in a very big way. And of course, the Chinese president, Xi Jinping himself, has decided to go, which was not planned until very recently. So this is China's way of establishing its presence in the Russian business world, and of Chinese and Russian business people who've never had much acquaintance with each other up to now, to get to know each other and to find out what they can agree on what they can do.
But what does that last minute attendance by Xi Jinping mean? I mean,
Yeah.
Usually that's very unorthodox to see
Oh,
such a high-profile leader kind of, show up at this type of event
at such
spur
short
of the
notice.
moment. I mean, it's not
absolutely.
It's not common.
And no, it's not common at all. And I'm pretty certain that it's related to the trade wars. I mean, I've seen articles in the Chinese media that are sort of trying to downplay that side, but it clearly is about the trade wars.
He's
in
signaling.
The sense that he's signaling, exactly. He's telling to well, I think he's partly signaling. He's telling to the US that, we've got alternatives if you really want to press us in this way. But I think also he's not just signaling, he's also bringing with him Chinese business people. He's signaling to them also. He's saying, look, start thinking seriously about Russia also. These are our friends. They're not going to sanction us. On the contrary, they want to trade with us in our currency. They are open to business with us, and we should be open to business with them. That's why I'm going there, and come with me. And I'm sure an awful lot of them will do so.
In the last couple of minutes, Alexander, I want to kind of go a little off-road here and ask you a question about the Far East. And a lot of people always say that Russia shouldn't trust China because China has claims on some territory in the Far East, or that Russia took territory from China in the Far East. What do you make of that argument, looking back in history and kind of drawing it to what's going on today?
I think this is absolutely outdated stuff. I don't think anybody in Russia should be concerned about it. And in fact, to my knowledge, very few people in Russia really are. There's a few people you find, either people on the very extreme far right in Russia, ultra-nationalist people, or on the very pro-American liberal left, if I can put it like that. China has absolutely no interest in souring its relations with Russia by laying claims territorial claims to Russian territories. If it started to do that, all that would happen is that Russia would automatically, and of its own interest, have to realign itself with the United States. I cannot see how that would benefit the Chinese, and all it would do is it would lose the Chinese possible access to Russian goods and raw materials and to the Russian market. So I think those quarrels from the 1960s are dead and gone. The Russians and the Chinese solved all their problems, all their border problems in the 1980s and early 1990s, and no one in either country has any interest in reopening them. And of that I am sure.
All right. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on that notifications bell to make sure you get notifications every time we push out a new video. And remember to also hit the like button. It really helps get our video out there. And of course, you can go to the Duran shop and you can pick up some mugs.
Beautiful mugs.
Some magic mugs.
Magic mugs, actually. I think.
And why are they magic again?
Because they're magic, because if you want to understand how we have this extraordinary geopolitical knowledge, Alex and I, it's because we drink from these mugs. Because you see, these mugs have our badge, which is the double-headed eagle, which points east and west, which gives us all this knowledge of what happens east and west. That's why we can talk about China and Russia and the US and all of these things in such detail. And also, here we have, this is actually the crest of Moscow on this mug, but here we have St. George slaying the dragon of fake news and untruth, which is what we do. So if you drink from these mugs, you're getting yourself high quality merchandise. These are really good mugs. They're solid, they're beautifully made, they are extraordinarily nice to drink from. I drink tea from them. I've actually drunk beer from them now, and they're great for drinking beer or hot chocolate or coffee or whatever you like. And as I say, you will imbibe a huge amount of knowledge from them if you do.
Very well said, Alexander.
And you can buy polo shirts like this one, 100% cotton, enormously comfortable to wear. It's a glorious hot day today. I was out walking the dogs, my 2 dogs, and I was wearing this polo shirt. And can I say, very comfortable it was to look at. And maybe some of the admiring glances I was getting weren't just about the dogs. Maybe it was the fact that I was such a well-dressed man about town.
All right. Oh, yeah. We're going to have to edit that. And don't forget, you can donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar as well. The links are in the description box down below. And you can follow us on Instagram, @Duran_com, and go to our website, theduran.com as well. And Alexander, we also have an ebook where we chronicle Brexit all the way up to the EU Parliament vote and Farage's tremendous victory during the EU Parliament elections. And you actually wrote a foreword to that book. So a couple seconds, you want to tell us what that foreword's about?
Yes, absolutely. If I may say, we in the Duran have been charting and explaining Brexit very carefully ever since the Brexit referendum. Firstly, as a news site, now as a YouTube, as a channel, as a TV channel, and I think by general consensus we've done it outstandingly well. And you get there the solid analysis that we provided, Alex and I. As we discussed the various twists and turns of the Brexit saga, but we also explain, both in our discussions and in the foreword that I drafted, how we predicted that the failure of the British political class to carry out Brexit would lead to this rise of a pro-Brexit party, which is what we're seeing now, with the rise of the Brexit party and of Nigel Farage. We were talking about it in 2016. We got it right then. And if you want to understand how we got it right, I would advise you to look at our book.
The link is in the description as well. So take a look at that book. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Until next time, everybody, take care.